And Bill in the past has been president of the Council for Exceptional Children Division for Behavioural Disorders in the USA. So he's a well-known expert in the behavioural area. And to the extent that Bill has been involved in policy making in Washington, as well as working in several countries around the world in terms of helping them develop policy for children with learning and behavioural difficulties. So that's the academic bit, but for those of you who know Bill, you know that he's very much an all-rounder. And three things that he's famous for besides the academics is that he's an avid tramper. And this time he did the Abel Tasman track, and last time he came he did the Milford track. And you know, so he's climbed mountains, so those two are sort of easy for him, but not for me. And he's also a handyman. He loves doing jobs around the house, so you know, any little jobs, you can speak to him afterwards. He's highly skilled in a range of areas. And the other thing is, he's very much a fitness fanatic. So if you come into work very early in the morning, about 5 or 6 o'clock, and you see someone flash by with a white shirt and blue shorts and greyish hair, it'll be Bill. So he's a man of many parts, and I know you're going to really enjoy his talk. So Bill, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Greyish hair. Thank you. I don't think I would flash by. It would be more like you would need a calendar to time me to get by. Several of you, several friends have seen me on campus running, and they said, God, I didn't think it was that possible if I could run that slowly. But it is. Thanks, Gary. I appreciate it. I have had an absolutely wonderful time here. Being here last year for 6 weeks prepared me for this year. I've been able to get into the schools a lot and make lots of friends. It can be very, very difficult to leave. In fact, I'm thinking about hiding out in somebody's house. If any of you have a spare bedroom that the immigration people would never visit, please let me know, because I will hide out in that house. So I do appreciate the opportunity to do this. Out and about around the country. Usually, I really look forward to this. Usually, I get asked to come in and look at something when there's a huge mess. This is wonderful. This is wonderful that you actually get to talk to people who are interested in your topic. Let me tell you how this kind of started, and this is, honest to goodness, true story. We have 5 kids. We lost one of our children, passed away several years ago, but we have 3 girls who are a little tool challenged. My grandfather was a builder, my dad was a builder, my brother's a builder, and we have, one of our girls was in the back room trying to hang some pictures one day, and I hear this bang, 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 damn it, bang, 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 damn it. And so I went back and I said, what in the world is going on back here that would necessitate you swearing back here? And she said, well, this thing is broken, it doesn't work. And I said, well, you're trying to put in a picture hook. You have a screwdriver in your hand. And I said, there's a problem here. Well, that's the only tool I had. Well, it's not the right tool. Trying to use that screwdriver to pound that nail in doesn't work. It's just not going to work. So got our hammer, and that ended the episode. Till a little while later, I hear her struggling around back there, and wasn't swearing this time, but it was this stupid thing. So I went back there, and she was trying to adjust some legs on a bed leg. It had screw posts on it, and it had what you refer to as an Allen key or an Allen wrench. Okay, well, she didn't let that bother her. She didn't know what that was, so she just had a pair of pliers and was trying to turn that thing. It just made an absolute mess of it. And I said, honey, get the right tool for the right thing. But it occurred to me at the time that we're all in that position frequently when we do jobs, and teachers are as well, that they're confronted with situations that they oftentimes don't have the tools for. It could be the professional tools, it could be the setting of the school, it could be kind of the hand that they're dealt in the classroom too. So my area of interest is behavior disorders. And one of the problems that we have with this population is that this is a group that is presents a lot of challenges to classroom teachers. So this is also a group that if we don't provide adequate treatment and education for these kids are very likely to be unemployed, underemployed, engage in drug abuse, have higher rates of incarceration. And this is a group that you want to pay attention to, because if we don't do something with this group, then we do something a little later on down the road. So that was kind of the impetus for this. So we started thinking about what would be a good title, and this piggybacks on a bunch of research that we're doing now. And what I'm going to give you tonight is a little bit of the research that we're doing, but I will preface it by saying that this is research that occurs in the United States, and I'm fully aware that you can't just pick things up and use them in another country. As Gary said, I do a lot of policy development work, and I do recognize that there's a narrative. There's a story that can be told, and some parts of it may be applicable to other settings, maybe it's not. But I can kind of tell you the story of what's going on, what we found, and what we're doing, where we're going. And it's up to you to kind of decide what works as part of that, or if any of it works, and what part of that story would have some application. Now, as Gary told you, I am from the University of West Florida, right there in Pensacola, Florida. If any of you have been in Pensacola? Have you really?
My dad lived there.
No kidding. West Florida, did he really?
Yeah, he was in construction and things, and we lived in Arkansas, but he worked down there for a while.
No kidding. Wow. First. Anybody else been in Pensacola? Usually, if people have been in Florida, they've been in Disney World. It's an awful place. It's just awful. It's about 300 degrees every day. People burst into flames. It's so hot. So here's Pensacola right there, and you'll see Tallahassee, Orlando, and then Miami. What I'm always struck with is, people say, "Yeah, I've been in Florida. I was in Miami." And do you go to Miami very often? Not unless I really have to. But it's Chicago, Illinois, is closer to us than Miami. The good part of living in Pensacola is we're 3 hours from New Orleans, which is sort of like Pleasure Island in Pinocchio's story. If you've ever been to New Orleans, you'll understand what I mean by that. Here's some pictures of the UWF campus, and these are the obligatory things that the publicity people say, oh, you must take these things. And this is our campus. Sure. And this is what it always looks like in the evening. And here are our students studying. Yeah. This is where you studied. Now, actually, 3 of these pictures were taken right near our house in Pensacola. I try to stay as far away from this scene as I possibly can. But that's kind of what it's like. And these are our students, eagerly awaiting a lecture. Actually, this was in Thika during Mardi Gras, and I know some of these kids, which is a little frightening because they're going to become teachers at some point. These are the kind of things you can torture them with. And these are our energetic students engaging ideas before class. Have you been to New Orleans for Mardi Gras? I haven't either. I'm kind of afraid to go, but it'd be a wonderful place to try. Now, let me kind of tell you the story of kind of how this starts, kind of leading you into some of the research and kind of what the function of this, how they kind of ended up doing this. Back in the mid-1980s, there was a book published, A Nation at Risk. And it was a group of educational experts and leaders of industry and science who got together, and it was a presidential commission, and looked at the state of American public education and came to some conclusions. There was a lot of criticism in industry that we were graduating people with diplomas and they couldn't read. Now, how is this possible? They could go through school, get high grades all the way through, but couldn't perform. So, in fact, there was one section of this that really kind of stood out. If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have to have viewed it as an act of war. This is by Glenn Seaborg. He was a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. Those of you in chemistry know exactly who I'm talking about. So this was a bit deal, and this kind of was a very much of a clarion call for some educational reform. But if you know a little bit about educational reform, politicians in the United States, this would never happen here in New Zealand. I know this, but in the United States, sometimes politicians get a little exuberant about things, and they'll make pronouncements and then not sure exactly what that means. So that's kind of where we were. But what it really meant was that there were some things that we had to take care of. There were some things that had to be addressed before we could look at this issue of standards of the quality of the education. So immediately, if you're going to start talking about improving education in the United States, this narrative went something like this: we need some educational standards. If you're going to have standards, then you need to have some type of assessment to determine whether those standards are being met. And if you're talking about actually doing something in a classroom, then there was a lot of evidence that we had an awful lot of instructional procedures being used in classrooms that were untried and unproven at best, and in some cases just downright didn't work. So there was a clear necessity for effective and proven interventions, and do you have necessarily a database that will support the use of these interventions? And teachers who could deliver for everyone. We had groups of teachers who were very good at delivering instructional programs for those kids who were average and well above average, but we had a substantial population of kids who were functioning in the lower quartile of performance. Kids who were functioning very low in terms of educational achievement, whose needs really weren't being met adequately. And that was the difficulty with that lower quartile. Teachers didn't know what to do, and we just didn't have a lot of things to do with them. Again, this was the mid-1980s. Not to say there wasn't a lot of work going on before this, but this was kind of just trying to pick up the story from this point. These kids, as I mentioned, have some very distinct problems. They do. I'm always struck. Last year, I was in 40-some schools around the country in the United States. And I'm always struck by teachers who, they want to do a good job, they're trying real hard, they're working real hard, but they just are absolutely frustrated. They feel just almost overwhelmed. They don't know what to do. It's not a matter of good intentions, but they're stuck. They don't know what to do. So we have to have teachers who are well trained, not only just to serve the high achieving kids, but also the low achieving kids. We also have to train teachers if we're going to put kids in regular classrooms, behavior disordered kids in regular classrooms. We have to have teachers who know how to handle behavior. We have to have school structures that allow that can accommodate and meet the needs of those kids. I will tell you this: we have a great deal of data to support this. That if you don't deal with these things, you will suffer from teacher stress and significant amounts of burnout and turnover of teacher populations. That's one of the things we discovered in the state of Florida we had at one point, until we changed some of the training procedures, we had a turnover rate of over 50% within 5-year period of time. Now, it's real difficult to sustain an educational program, public educational program, when you're turning over that many faculty that quickly. Plus, in the state of Florida, we had the added burden that there are 67 counties in the state of Florida. On the average, there's a school built a month per school district. So if you can imagine 700 new kids per month in a school district, what that amounts to in terms of huge numbers of teachers, and then compound that over a number of states. So these are issues that if you don't address them, you're not going to hold on to your staff either. At least this is what we've found in the United States. I will tell you this though, boy, I told my wife after when we were here last year, if I was starting out and we had kids, this would be the place I would live. The schools, boy, I have been so impressed with the schools. I mean, it's just I've seen some of the best teaching I've ever seen here, so, and wonderful teachers. No Child Left Behind mandated. This was a law. I get asked this question. I've been asked this question about 1,000 times here about No Child Left Behind. I was after Bush was elected president, I was approached about taking the job as Assistant Secretary of Education. My wife pointed out to me, probably correctly, that would end tragically. That I would be on the front page of the Washington Post beating some guy with a hammer within about 5 minutes of listening to some of this political foolishness. But No Child Left... Yeah, I don't think so. No Child Left Behind, though, was a law that is oftentimes misunderstood, and so, but it necessitated and caused some changes in how we do things with kids, lower quartile kids, kids who are functioning at the very lowest levels in our public schools. One of the things that they did is after states adopted educational standards and developed criterion reference tests to test those standards, then there was a great deal of effort spent on getting quality educational programs to those kids. One of the things that we found was that if you're going to do this, you have to change school services. If you're going to have wraparound services and inclusion services, then teachers have to be trained. If you're going to have to, and you're going to have to train them in a slightly different way. Those people who are currently teaching necessitate some retraining. Regular educators and special educators. That takes money. That takes time. Excuse me. So all of that is. But if you're going to do those sorts of things, you kind of you have to do those. You have to engage in those things. The other thing that we found is that whatever we're doing here, and I'm going to use this term several times tonight, you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach, especially with these kids. These are kids who you need an array of service options. You need to be able to have access to those kids in the regular classroom, but you also need to be able to have school services that will allow you to deliver the specialized care for those kids in the school setting. One of the big problems we had was suspension, or as you would say here, stand-downs. We had some schools that, to get rid of their problem, they would suspend the kids at sometimes most of the year, a good deal of the year. And you point out to them that if they're not in the school, they're not engaging in the educational program. But as they would point out, but yes, they're not my problem, but they become a problem for the community and the police. So these are angry kids. So one of the policy decisions that was made at the national level was to limit the number of suspensions days to a maximum of 10 a year. And I have the data. The data were just unbelievable. We had many kids being suspended for extremely long periods of time. So that meant the schools had to come up with different ways to serve the population. Well, a couple of things that we have found with No Child Left Behind is that it didn't do much for the upper quartile, those kids who were really bright, but what it did for the low kids, those kids ended up with more instructional opportunities, more teacher-student interaction and positive interaction. There was an across-the-board improvement in instructional skills with those kids. We've had a very good effect with those kids. Hasn't done much for the upper-level kids, but for those kids at the bottom, this has been very effective, and a greater satisfaction of parents. That has been that's come through with very, very loud and clear. That regular educators and parents are pleased with the increased services that these kids are getting. I'm sorry?
It's the lower quartiles children's parents that like to say it's
Right.
Not the upper quartiles.
Yeah, no, those kids were just that No Child Left Behind really didn't have an effect on those kids or those parents. This is what happens if you don't address these kids. Okay. Now, one of the things we've started in this research is we recognize the fact that we have to be able to identify procedures that work, instructional procedures that work. And then we have to find out, let's look at teachers' ability and understanding and using these things. And so that was kind of the impetus for the research. So one of the things that we started with was looking at the professional literature to find out what we know actually works with behavior disordered kids, not only in terms of teaching academic skills, but in terms of also teaching non-academic skills such as social skills. And this brought up the issue of what does a teacher of the behavior disorders do? I mean, are they a deliverer of an academic program, or are they a deliverer of a social skills program? Well, kind of both. So we began looking at these, and we identified a ton of these things, but we limited it to 20. That's what we really worked on. We wanted to find 20 interventions that worked the best. And that's what we did. We set out to do that. We looked through the literature, and then we had a panel of experts look at these things and say, which of these do you consider to be the most valuable? And certainly the literature, the power of the literature, professional literature certainly indicated which of these were the most effective. We limited these to the 20 most effective practices, and we started in Virginia. And again, I'm trying to distill down a whole bunch of stuff. I'm just giving you just a kind of a snippet of stuff. We looked at over 3,000 general and special educators across elementary or primary here, middle school and secondary settings, regular and special educators. And what we were looking for were these three things down here at the bottom. What is their use of evidence-based practices, and how important do they think these things are? And are they prepared to actually implement these instructional procedures? These are the three things, excuse me, that were of primary interest to us. So what we found right out of the gate, and this is not a big surprise to you at all, was that regular and special educators viewed specialized instruction, instruction that could be focused on the specific needs of behavior disordered kids or special needs kids, that was a very important thing. Everybody agreed to that, and that seems kind of obvious, and we weren't overly impressed with ourselves that we discovered the obvious here. But gets a little bit more interesting a little further down. So we started looking at school-wide practices, classroom practices, and individual practices. And these interventions, we broke these things out in terms of, and you'll see, these are just the designators that we use for coding the data. We found that school-wide practices, the two most effective things: clear rules and expectations, and a crisis intervention plan for emergency situations. You have to have these things. Literature indicates it, and the experts in the field indicate that. In terms of classroom-level practices, if you're teaching academic skills for behavior disordered kids, special needs kids, academic support and curricular instructional modifications, a systematic approach to cooperative learning. I'll come back to that in just a second. A specialized instruction to promote learning and study skills, and peer-assisted learning. Peer-assisted learning is an incredibly powerful tool to use in the classroom. Now, what we found was that an awful lot of teachers said, well, we use cooperative learning. But when you actually examined it a little further down the line, we found that not quite sure that you do. So what we were more interested in is, do you do this in a systematic way? So we kind of had to go back and kind of alter that. And in terms of these 20 effective practices, non-academic skill and non-academic teaching of non-academic skills, peer-mediated intervention, this first one, a conflict resolution program, social skill training instruction taught as part of a regular class instruction. What we found with most social skill instruction was consistent with past literature. Most social skill instruction was not terribly impressive in terms of the effect. It can be if you do it right, but an awful lot of the social skill instruction isn't done particularly well in some cases. Anger management training programs, which seems kind of obvious, but you'll kind of see this a little later on. There's some curious information with this. Clear rules and expectations, behavior support and management program, pre-correction instructional strategies. The pre-correctional instructional strategy is kind of an interesting thing, because it allows, we always used to operate under the assumption that you learn by your mistakes. But the problem is that there's a whole group of kids who don't learn from their mistakes, and instruction would be a lot more effective and a lot more efficient if we could eliminate those mistakes and eliminate about half of the instructional problem right out of the gate. Sometimes letting them learn from their mistakes, probably a good idea. One of the things interestingly enough, clear rules and expectations. I was in a classroom last year up in Northeast Florida, and there was a kid who was misbehaving in the classroom, and the teacher looked at him and said, "You've disobeyed, you've broken rule number 47. I said, 47, golly, Moses had 10, you know? And I'm looking at this kid, and he goes, he had them memorized. And I said, surely there's not 47 rules. Oh, no, there's 52. And I said, where? And he said, oh, in the back room. And so I went to the back room, and he had a list of 52 rules. And the 47th one, in fact, the kid had broken. Anyways, probably a good idea. I always advise teachers, if you're going to have rules, distill them down to 3, 5, or 7. After 7, I have enough time. I have a hard enough time finding my keys in the morning. I'm never going to remember 47 rules. Systematic approach to cooperative learning. Here it comes again. We've found that this is a good way of teaching non-academic skills. Social skills instruction as taught as part of the regular class instruction. Anger management, clear rules, expectations, peer-assisted learning comes up again. Behavior management support, pre-correction. These are all the things that we found to be effective strategies. And what we wanted to find out is, are they used in teaching academic skills, or are they in terms of teaching non-academic skills? And so we asked the teachers, we gave them a rating scale with each of these things. What degree of importance do you see with these? And to what degree do you use these things on a 1 to 5 scale? And how knowledgeable are you about these skills? So that's kind of the foundation for where we started. You'll see some more of these things. On an individual basis, one of the techniques here I'd like to highlight. this PBIS is something that's going to, he's been here, hasn't he, George? The guy's been here, yeah. If you haven't seen schools, I've been around special ed a long time, and I've seen a lot of baloney. But I'll tell you what, the schools that I have worked with who have adopted PBIS or positive behavior support, this is a school-wide program involving parents in the development and the teachers in the development of this. This stuff works, boy. It changes the culture of a school in about a heartbeat. So in terms of best individual practices, behavior contracts, and a formal procedure to develop functional-based interventions, and pre-correctional procedures again. It keeps coming up over and over. So these were the 20 interventions that we know that work. So here's what we found. Most regular and special educators agreed on the importance and use of 8 practices. They agreed that rules and expectations were most important. Behavior supports, management plans, those were important. They agreed on that. And PBIS was important, as was crisis intervention. Academic support and curricular modifications, everybody agreed to that. They thought those were important. Specialized instructions, choice-making opportunities, and self-monitoring. Self-monitoring is a really powerful tool for kids at certain stages in their development. Now, what we also found, and this is, I can't give you all of this data, but we said, wouldn't it be interesting, we got about halfway through this data collection, the first state we were in, and said, wouldn't it be interesting, let's talk to education professors and pre-service teachers and find out if they thought that those things were important. Well, we found that there was a little bit of a difference. Some university professors didn't think these were important at all, even though this is what came out of the professional literature. And most pre-service teachers didn't see these as important. When we went back and asked teachers who had graduated in their first year of teaching, then they suddenly found that these were important. So that has some implications for what we do with and who we train. Now, what they said they were the least prepared to implement, but they viewed them as important. That's a critical distinction. They thought that the functional behavior assessment was important, but they really didn't know how to do it. More regular educators said that, which was surprising because this is something that really is a hallmark of any intervention that's going to be used. Group-oriented contingency management plans, they didn't know a lot about this, as with crisis intervention plans. Precorrection, thought that sounded really good, but they didn't really have an understanding of what that was. Peer-mediated interventions, anger management, conflict resolution, self-monitoring, peer reinforcement. Now, it's not a huge surprise that we had teachers who didn't necessarily know what these things were because they were trained at a time where maybe they wouldn't have. Again, this is United States information. So what that points to is that if we know that these things are important with behavior disordered kids, these are the things that work, but we have a group of teachers who don't know these techniques, then that means that really necessitates us organizing a training system to allow that to occur so that they can gain that information. What they felt the most prepared to use were clear rules and expectations and academic supports and modifications. And the academic support's really critical. Boy, with special needs kids, unless you have that in the classroom, those kids are really going to struggle. And I've seen, I'll tell you, in New Zealand schools, when I've been in the schools, watching teachers work with kids, there is nobody better than this. I have seen just some absolutely fabulous teaching that's gone on in schools with providing the support, providing support to kids of all ability groups. But the least used was peer-mediated instruction, which is a very valuable technique, group contingencies, peer reinforcement, and anger management. We were really surprised with the anger management part of this thing because these were the least used, but yet these are the kids who manifest these anger issues to the greatest degree. Some of the differences that we found between general and special educators. Pre-correction and social skills training were important to special educators, but not regular educators. Well, most regular educators are taught how to deliver the academic subject area, not necessarily taught how to handle the social part of the thing. That's probably predictable. But if you're going to have behavior disordered kids in inclusionary settings, they're going to have to know these things. And neither the special educators or the regular educators felt like they were particularly well trained in order to move forward with these. Now, when we interview these people, actually, I didn't. This is why we have graduate students to do these things. We send our graduate students out to do these interviews. But I did. I spent a lot of time actually talking to parents and teachers, and one of the problems of teachers will say, well, you know, they're always very well intentioned. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to reach this kid. And the problem is that they didn't understand that they had to teach to the stage of learning that the kid was at. Not every kid is going to instantly grasp the material and kind of build on that. And they felt as if the curriculum was moving forward and this kid wasn't getting it. And how do you do that? And they were very, very frustrated with that. We do know, and I will tell you this, this politicians hate to hear this, but these problems are complex. They are extremely complex. You cannot pull out one component of this in order to address this problem. These are things that require lots of different solutions, and it's absolutely not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. But what we have discovered is that the skills that regular educators need are basically the same skills that special educators need. That's one of the reasons at University of West Florida we have the 17th largest teacher training program in the country, and it's dwarfed by many other programs. I say 17th, that sounds big. It's not by comparison, but all of our undergraduate students come out trained in elementary or primary education and special ed. They come out with dually certified, along with ESOL certified, English as a second language, and certified in reading as well. So it's what we found is that the distinction, the way we used to think that we would train special educators differently than regular educators, if you move towards full inclusion, you're going to have to abandon some of that. At least that's what we found. And again, this is just simply a United States story that may or may not have any applicability anywhere else. And you're going to have to train the school staff, the school structure. You're going to have to that'll accommodate these kids. What do you do if you suspend a kid? We had one school in Pensacola area that suspended 1 year, honest, good, 75% of the kids at some point. Now that ought to be an indication that you have an instructional program that's not working. 75% of the kids at some point during the year are stood down. You know, that's ridiculous. So one of that necessitates, if you're going to do something with inclusion there, with 75% of the kids being suspended at some point, you're not going to be very successful with inclusion. So there's going to have to be a change in the structure of the school. But what do you do? Because frankly, I hear all the time from from some people that, well, I can't do anything with these kids. They won't let me do anything. You can't throw them out. You can't spank them anymore. So what am I supposed to do with these kids? Well, there are other things that you have to do, but you have to have a school structure that accommodates those things. Maybe an in-school suspension that you have. But that requires somebody to staff it. That requires some procedure by which you monitor those kids. And it requires you to identify which kinds of problems seem to be the most troublesome, or which grade levels and which teachers seem to have the most problem. But it requires data, it requires information, so that you can focus your interventions rather on the specific problems that really do exist in your school. The other part of this is that there are two correlates with student learning. We've done a lot of research across countries. This seems to be very consistent. The good news is the two correlates with student learning are the conditions in the classroom, what happens, the quality of instruction that occurs in that classroom, and teacher behavior and attitude. Now, if you think about it, those are the two things that the teacher controls. That's the good news. So the two things that are the most correlated with student learning are the things that we have the greatest control over. That's the really good news. I think we need to kind of keep that in mind, that these are not unsolvable problems with this population. Some of the things that we're going to have to address, though, our questions are going to change. What's the role of technology in this? In the state of Florida, all kids now have to have at least one online course, fully online course in high school. We've made that a requirement. We've gone to a significant portion of our population. Our teacher training program is now online. We train people all over the world. We had teachers in 24 countries last year. 60% of our students are online. Now, they still have practicum. We have a lot of practicum. That's really where you learn the craft of teaching. I'm convinced of that, not sitting in a college class. But you have to have the college didactic information. So, and we can do that, and this issue with technology is one that is not going to go away. So I think teacher training programs are going to have to address that, and how we do that with kids. Frankly, oftentimes the kids come in a lot better trained in technology than we do as teachers, and so you find yourself asking the kids for technical assistance in the classroom, which very commonly occurs. Merging of competencies for regular and special educators, we've already talked about that. The other part of this that's going to be a real challenge is, in challenging economic times, how do we staff these programs? What do we do with these programs? How do we think about these programs? And what are the implications for how we deliver these in the United States? This has caused a discussion about school choice. So we start with this whole issue of an issue with quality of education, and suddenly we're talking about all of these other issues that are a result of that initial question. So one of the things that ought to be kind of considered in here is this is a discussion that probably does occur in most places. You kind of have to think through some of those things. We do know what happens if you don't do anything. These kids run into a real mess, as well as the schools. We know that these kids have tremendously high rates of dropout. And the question is, if you have a program where you have a significant educational program, the state is funding that, and these kids aren't profiting from that program and drop out, and you have to pay for all the other social services with these kids, then where do you want to pay your money? Do you want to pay it up front in the educational program, or a result at the end? So the other thing that we have found is, again, going right back to this thing, one size absolutely does not fit all. And I know I'm going to keep repeating that, because that is absolutely critical. Just as you have an array of stores that you go to purchase products, you have to have an array of services for kids, because they sometimes have very, very different needs. And if you do that, everybody's going to be happy. Questions?